we need to stop the historical revisionism that presents Victory in Europe Day as simply a European victory against fascism by the forces of good and democracy and human rights, because this is a deceptive narrative. At the same time, when the Europeans were celebrating that victory in Europe, they were massacring tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of colonized people, people who fought for Western powers to liberate them from the forces of fascism and Nazism. Today, 8th of May 2025, marks the 80th commemoration of the Victory in Europe Day with the end of the Second World War. You will see some pompous celebration by Western ruling elites and their subservient media, presenting this day as simply a victory against fascism by the forces of good, democracy, human rights, and freedom. Many things will be unsaid, and several inconvenient truths that challenge that deceptive narrative would be concealed. First of all, fascism and Nazism have been tolerated in Europe for long. In fact, many of the leaders of the so called free world, figures like Winston Churchill, were anti Semites themselves, not really caring about the fate of Jews in Europe. Things need to be named as they are. The Second World War was a brutal and murderous inter-imperialist war, mainly between Western powers that scrambled for domination, influence, resources, and land in various parts of the world. It was also a war that mobilized and forced millions of colonized people to fight for the imperialist ruling classes that sacrificed them as cannon fodder and did not really care about their aspiration for self determination and liberation from Western colonialism. For example, when France was invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany, tens of thousands of Algerians, Moroccans, Senegalese, Vietnamese, and others joined the fight to liberate France when they were hoping that it would lead to their liberations themselves. But when France rose from its ruins, it set about restoring its shattered empire in its all colonial hubris. Despite negotiations in Paris between the French colonialists and Ho Chi Minh to find a compromise to the question of post war Vietnam, and despite the victory of the left, including the communists, in the French elections in November 1946, the French government decided to reconquer Vietnam. Whether it was led by the right, the center, the left, or by forces that were religious or secular, and from republic to another, France continued to cling to its empire from the Dien Bien Phu Valley to the Kasbah of Algiers. Exactly on this day, 80 years ago, while Europeans were joyfully celebrating the Nazi capitulations, Algerians marched in Sétif for independence and the end of colonialism, deploying banners with slogans such as Freedom for the People, Long Live Free and Independent Algeria. They also brandished for the first time what would become the flag of the Algerian National Liberation Front, the FLN. The French authorities crushed these protests in blood, triggering a rebellion that led to the murder of 103 European settlers. French colonial retaliation to these murders was savage. The French military, with its air, navy, and army, bombed many regions, burnt and razed many villages to the ground in Sétif, Guelma, and Kharrata. Across 2 months, the French troops, alongside vengeful settlers, slaughtered tens of thousands of Algerian Muslims, with estimates as high as 45,000 people. The parallels between these massacres, the massacres in Sétif, Guelma, and Kharrata, and the 7th of October, Al Aqsa operation flood by the Palestinian resistance against Israel, and the pitiless genocidal butchery that followed it are too stark to ignore. In both cases, resistance, whether peaceful or armed, was disallowed, and aspiration for self-determination were crushed with savage brutality. The same supremacist colonial mindset and the same racist and orientalist explanation of why the oppressed and colonized revolt persist today. Palestinian resistance acts, like those of the Algerians and Vietnamese before them, are often put down to pure evil, inhumane savagery, and timeless barbarism by mindless and medieval terrorists, far removed from a context of more than 75 years of settler colonialism, apartheid, and occupations. The massacres that followed the 8th of May 1945 events in Algeria had serious repercussions on the Algerian nationalist movement. For the young generation of militants then, the Algerian war had already started, and preparation for armed struggle can no longer be postponed. Every Algerian nationalist that was prominent in the FLN traces back their revolutionary determination to May 1945. It won't be surprising if Palestinians and Arab revolutionaries would trace back their commitment to struggles for liberation to the genocide that followed the 7th of October attacks and the heroic resistance in Gaza that still goes on today despite all odds. This year, 2025, coincides with an important chapter of anti colonial history. The Afro Asian Bandung Conference that was organized in 1955 in Indonesia. It was a conference that challenged colonialism and neo-colonialism in an era of the awakening of the South. The Bandung spirit still lives on today. Some histories are ignored, others are sidelined in order to maintain certain hegemonies and to hide from view an inspiring era of revolutionary connections between struggles for liberation in various continents. We must dig into this past, familiarize ourselves with its histories, learn from them, and discern some potential convergences across ongoing struggles. The Vietnamese and Algerians ended up defeating the French colonialists in the 50s and the 60s, and the Vietnamese went on to defeating the US Army in the 70s. Palestinians, with their allies, will eventually defeat Israel with its Western backers. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.